Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to our webcast covering PwC's 2025 Digital Trust Insight Survey with a regional perspective focusing on Central Eastern Europe. I'm really excited for the opportunity to moderate this panel this year as well. Just like last year, it's been becoming a bit of a tradition for us just before the holiday to gather a group of business, technology, and security executives, both with a local perspective. By local, I mean across CEE and really beyond. And knowing them, I think both their experience and their colorful personalities will be on full display as we investigate the topic of building cybersecurity through C-suite collaboration. Now, we are living in a pretty dynamic world, especially the last few years. And as AI usage expands and gets more sophisticated, as we get more traction with connected devices, more adoption through cloud technology, as all of these grow in importance, the cyber attack surface also broadens. And so achieving cyber resilience is more critical than ever. My name is Peter Durja. I'm a partner at PwC leading the cybersecurity practice in Central and Eastern Europe. We have a team of nearly 200 practitioners covering capabilities from strategy and architecture through implementation and managed services. And prior to taking on this role, I had the opportunity to spend several years in our global cyber team, focusing on connected execution across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, serving our key clients. And before that, I spent 14 years working in the United States, based in California. Now let's turn our attention to our four panelists. I'm going to introduce them briefly, starting with Laura. Laura Duncan is a cybersecurity partner based in London, UK. And Laura, I first got to know you while we were both in the US. I think you were in the Dallas office some 15 years ago. And that is where you began your career, and then you crossed the pond over, coming over to the United Kingdom. I know you as a passionate professional with extensive global experience, which covers also parts of Central Eastern Europe, and you embody genuine collaboration. Now, you've also overseen several multi-year security-led transformational programs in the retail and consumer industry. As a matter of fact, right now, you are our EMEA industry leader for cyber, for retail and consumer as well. So it is great to have you, and it will be great to get a broader geographical. Has recently joined Lunar Group as their Chief Information Officer based in Tallinn, Estonia. He brings over 2 decades of experience in fintech, driving digital and cultural transformation. And this spans, as I mentioned, the Baltics, Ukraine, Croatia, and Albania as well. And the war in Ukraine, and you spent 4.5 years there, just recently came over, really underscored the criticality and the need for preparedness, resilience, and even sustainability. So we'll hear more about this during our panel discussion. Outside the office, he's an amateur photographer, reader, and producer of olive oil. Really looking forward to your powers include deciphering cryptic error messages and explaining cybersecurity to executives without inducing narcolepsy. In his spare time, Chris engages in risky behavior, things like kiteboarding and gravity is not his friend, cycling through the gravel roads of Europe, where he frequently questions his own map reading skills. I'm quoting him. And it seems that he is living life on the edge, but he's in the banking industry, always on point, fueled by caffeine and a healthy dose of paranoia. And he's responsible as the CSO for not only fraud, risk management, cybersecurity, information security, business continuity management, but also physical security. So that will be an additional perspective. Chris, it's great to have you on our panel. And last but not least, my colleague from our Central Eastern European cybersecurity leadership team, Marek Hlebicki, who's a partner based in Warsaw, Poland. Marek, he spent half your professional life in the industry, most recently as the head of group IT strategy and transformation and an international financial institution, and then the other half on the consulting side. So that's a unique combination we're going to want to tap into. And you also worked in a long list of countries in CEE. Probably everyone who's listening in from somewhere, Marek, has worked there. So that deep connection should help us in our conversation too. And right now you are leading the Digital Resilience Center, realizing your mission to have clients be more resilient, cyber secure, and really to fuel their innovation within the context of resiliency. So now I'll be taking a few minutes to walk you through this year's survey results. You should be able to see this on the screen, and I'll talk about this. So this year's survey is packed with pretty great insights again. Now, this is one of our longest running surveys. This actually began in the late 1990s, and even when Laura and I were in the US, this was called Global Information Security Survey, and we have adopted, as has the world. So it's been focusing on digital transformation, trust, and digital resilience. Over the course of the years, it's been rebranded and its focus has shifted. And we also cast a pretty broad net with over 4,000 respondents globally, spanning almost 80 countries. And these respondents are mostly from the business, technology, and security as well, CEOs, C-level, and technology executives. There were 230 participants in our region, as you can see, from Baltics, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. The list is long. We had a pretty good spread. And if you look at their background, 56%, so more than half, came from the business. Roughly 35% has a security background, and 9% has data and privacy. So over half business, and then split between security and data privacy. Now, in terms of industry, it's a combination of financial services, industrial manufacturing, retail, consumer, energy, utilities, technology, and a few more. And in terms of the size of the companies that were represented from our region, 10% had more than 5 billion revenue, another 10% between 1 and 5, and really the big chunk, 80%, had less than $1 billion from the revenue perspective. Now, in terms of theme, last year here at PwC, we created a playbook for C-level executives to have them focus on the questions they need to answer with their Chief Information Security Officer. And we updated this playbook for this year, and we're likely to see some shifts. So let's take a look at the 4 themes that we have. Now, if you look on the right, cybersecurity continues to be a priority, with nearly 60% globally and over half of the survey respondents in CEE ranking cyber as the top risk that their enterprise is prioritizing to mitigate, to manage in the next year or so. Cyber risk reporting, we all know that it's a bit of a journey in and of itself. And in terms of measuring and articulating the economic impact of cyber risk, while it's a staggering 70% for Europe, it dips into the high 40s in CEE, which I think really reveals the opportunity that we still have here. And it'll be interesting to get our panelists' take on this topic as well. What worries organizations the most is what they are least prepared for. And that's an important statement. The top 4 concerns are cloud-related threats, hack and leak operations, third-party breaches, and attacks on connected products, connected devices. And for the most part, these are the same ones that security executives feel the least prepared to address. So here we are, and yet only 2% of businesses has implemented an enterprise-wide cyber resilience program. And so really this gap between the concern and the level of preparedness highlights the urgency that we need for better investments and really just stronger response capabilities. And we actually see actions taken. The survey finding does highlight that organizations are taking actions. About 2/3 in our region is looking to increase their budget in the coming year. It's a bit higher in EMEA, and globally it's nearly 3/4. And in terms of the size of the budget increase, if we stick with CEE, then about 30% expect this to increase by 5 to 10% next year. About 20% or a fifth expect this to increase by more than 11%. And so this really begs the question of how is this budget used? And it's not only used by technology leaders to strengthen the cybersecurity posture of their organization, but also for business enablement and business empowerment. So cyber clearly is a business imperative, and organizations cite investment in cyber as a key differentiator for competitive advantage, with roughly 57% citing customer trust and about 49% citing brand integrity and loyalty as primary drivers for such investments. So that's definitely very important. In the backdrop, cyber regulations are also driving this boost, especially the past 6 to 18 months. So 91% reports that regulations have fueled the cyber investment as well. Speaking of regulations, despite the belief that these regulations are helping the organization, there's a significant disconnect between the CEO and the chief security officer or chief information security officer in terms of their confidence in their ability to comply with these regulations. And on top of that, the risk that business executives and tech executives prioritize differ as well. So while business executives, of course, are more concerned with inflation, tech executives rank cyber as their top priority. Well, their proximity to the threat landscape, and especially CISOs, again, chief information security officers who are on the front line, they are more worried about their organization's ability to meet these requirements. And the biggest gap from a regulatory perspective is with resilience, critical infrastructure, and AI. And so we'll end this before we start the conversation on AI. We put secure AI and AI for security to kind of look at both sides of the coin. Clearly, business and technology executives have a mandate to fuel innovation and bring in AI-enabled solutions, either to increase operational efficiency or find new, creative, innovative ways to engage clients, consumers, and customers. And so security leaders have to make sure that they are not an impediment to this progress, but they have to secure these AI solutions. And on the flip side, AI can and should and is being used for security as well. Things like increased and more intelligent, threat intelligence for one, but also detection and response capabilities. So these are the 4 key themes that we are going to dissect through the panel discussion right now. So this just about wraps up the outline for the survey. So let's actually get the panel conversation going. So again, cost has really become a factor in the last couple of years. We know this given the global economic uncertainty. But with cyber being a boardroom imperative, and let's see if everyone agrees with that, we see that survey respondents are not pulling in the reins on spending, even with this cost-constrained environment. So, Ankel, I'd like to engage you first to kick off our conversation. You are a very purpose-driven leader who's worked at several large organizations providing critical national infrastructure. So from your perspective, is cybersecurity a broad-level imperative? And if so, how has the board's treatment of this topic evolved recently?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Do you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Cybersecurity is an imperative on 2 areas. For example, in Ukraine, initially, before the war, it was one of the fastest growing markets in this part of the world. And cybersecurity can either be the fastest accelerator or one of the biggest impediments to the successful modernization of a company. So what we were doing is basically we identified cyber as a value for our customers, but as well a big enabler for the digitalization of the company and executing our strategy. which means designing a cyber as a platform. So embedding it with engineering in the value chain of delivering not only products and services, but as well policies and everything. So that's number one. Number two, with the war hitting, of course, it showed that the investment which we did earlier paid off big time. Paid off that we were able to move to the cloud in 3 months, paid off that we were able to massively accelerate our development pipelines, to automate, and to be able to adapt to a very fast changing environment outside. So the boards where I have been sitting on, I do not see much discussion on cybersecurity, and I think the value is recognized. But if before we talked more about the governance part of cybersecurity, we're talking more and more about the engineering part of cybersecurity, product security, and so treating it as an engineering function in addition to just a governance function. We used to say in Ukraine that paper security is not real security. You should back it up with strong engineering and have a lot of discipline and persistence into creating this, if you want, a digital company, a modern digital company.
Thank you. Appreciate your insights. Now, we're going to be doing some technical checks throughout, and Ankilai, we heard you quite well, so I know this is working. This was really a unique perspective and great insight. Now, let's get another viewpoint on this. Chris, are you with us? Can you hear me? Is your setup working? Not quite. Marek, putting you on the spot here. Is your setup working?
Yes, everything works.
All right. So given that you spend a lot of time in financial services as well, which represents the backbone of a country's economy, cyber, we know, is a board level topic. And Ankilai just mentioned right now that we're moving obviously from governance and paper security to more techy topics and engineering. Any thoughts on how do you contextualize this and how do you provide a translation to business executives when you talk about resilient cybersecurity?
Sure. So listen, I think the cyber definitely is a board topic or is becoming a board topic, and definitely recently and in our region, we see this transition. I think what is maybe the biggest shift, and this is something which Ankilai have already mentioned, because I think it was given in his perspective, is that for the many years, cybersecurity was perceived as a governance and also cost function, while currently it also transforms to the actual value for the customer, because arguably the stability, continuity of the operations, stability also from the cybersecurity perspective, protection of the customer data and the customer, in the case of the financial services, also the customer financials, is the value, is actually what the clients are looking for. So looking from this perspective, I think this is the very important change in terms of the mindset and the way the cybersecurity is discussed. The second thing that the recent changes in terms of the war in Ukraine, the massive scale up of the cyber attacks, but also some other also physical nature threats which happened in the recent period, are changing the way how it's being perceived. So a lot of, so to say, very exotic or improbable scenarios in the past have actually materialized, which also, I think, makes the discussion about cybersecurity much more tangible. So it's not anymore a hypothetical discussion about what could eventually happen, but no one actually is perceiving this as a real threat, but it's actually discussing how prepared we are for something which actually may happen. And I think these two things, the value perception and the understanding of different threat landscape elements and risk, which are actually materializing, these are maybe the biggest challenges or the changes, which I see in terms of the entire board discussion about cybersecurity.
Thank you. I think this is really good. And you mentioned bit of a carrot and a stick, meaning companies are incentivized if they understand to really focus on this. having a resilient business. And on the flip side, a little bit, some of these regulations that we know around critical infrastructure require business executives to become fluent in this as well. And obviously, the visibility around cyber and resilience has increased as a result of that. When it comes to some of these trends in the boardroom and budgets, there's still a market difference between Western Europe and Central Eastern Europe. So Laura, the question will come to you. From your perspective, what are your views on some of these regional differences that the survey has highlighted, and what is driving the increased commitment to spend the way you see it?
Yeah, so thanks, Peter, and lovely to be here amongst such really inspirational leaders. I think for me, the budget differentiation and the kind of different focus. So if I look in the UK where I'm based, cybersecurity is definitely a boardroom priority, and we get brought into the boardroom quite often to give perspectives on the topic. It's tough. It evolves quickly. It changes. It's very dynamic, and we see a lot of activation there. I think in terms of budgets, it does depend a lot on industry as well as location. So, for example, there's a lot of regulation coming in that's driving up budgets, especially in the FS industry. For example, retail and consumer, where I specialize in, is quite different. A, are they recovering after COVID at the sales growth, and have they implemented their strategy that allows them to be able to spend more? And B, some people are producing critical goods and services. So if I look at grocery stores, that might be a separate budget than, I don't know, fashion industry. So you see like high-end fashion industry with significantly smaller budgets because they haven't fully recovered yet. So I think the budget differentiation is really still aligned to business performance. But I do see an increasing awareness. I was surprised to hear that it's not necessarily in the boardroom yet in the CEE region consistently. It sounds like it's growing, but definitely in the UK at least, it's very much a boardroom priority. And I think that I would encourage budgets to continue to grow. I guess the second thing is that the devil's in the detail, Peter, I think, around budgets and where that money is actually being accounted for. So we all know, if we are all security professionals, that sometimes things like cloud costs, other technologies might be accounted for in the wider IT budget, which is why you always see that alignment to security and wider IT budget. So I guess I just encourage people to think about where those costs for security are being accounted for before people are worried that they're not spending enough or spending too much, and just make sure that you and your organization are looking at where that spend sits.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, sure.
All right. It's been quite trendy, if I may say, to talk about resilience. And if you think back to the findings, organizations feel, again, least prepared to address the very threats that they find most concerning, cloud-related risk, third parties, etc. But only 2% have filled some of these gaps. So resilience is a broad topic, and it could have serious consequences and really an impact not only on your company, but society as a whole. And so, Ankalaid, you were scratching the surface of the iceberg just in terms of how this really came about in Ukraine. But can I ask you to bring this concept of resilience to life through more concrete examples?
Yes.
Thank you.
First, when we started, so I'll start from my last point. We initially started in Ukraine because we considered it to be the most interesting market in Europe. It was 2021. And for many of my Ukrainian friends, they remember that that's the best year in the history of Ukraine. And because the market was booming, and we hired roughly 300 engineers in 1 year. And we're working with Marek, for example, He was from the headquarters. I was in Ukraine to accelerate the cloud and many priorities. When the war hit, that engineering muscle which we created was a lifesaver. And I'll touch upon a few points here, if you allow me for a couple of minutes. We reprioritized the entirety in our product setup to focus on resilience. So our backlog changed overnight from a backlog of delivering one or the other product to a product in resilience. For example, we lost our operational center in Kherson in one day, and we switched the operations, and I'm talking manual operations, loan processing, payments processing, to a distributed model. We switched call center to a distributed model. We launched a card, which our Slovak colleagues from Slovakia helped us in a week or so. We called it a doomsday card. For a bank like us, to launch such a product would take roughly a year. But when the purpose is very clear and the lives of your customers depend, and where many families split, we found a way to use gift cards. So the innovation was as well on steroids. So my first point is resilience. It's a much broader topic. Engineering is a way how to tap into that resilience, and it's a massive value for our customers. And ever since we have been running, and I left 3 months ago, but we have been running scenarios on a monthly basis. What could happen, how to adapt, how to allocate investments. When we had a massive cyber attack on one of the biggest telecom, we had a lesson learned, and then we allocated another 100 people to deal with patches and vulnerabilities in 2-3 weeks. So the second point I want to make is the board must retain that flexibility of not playing with probabilities, because it's very easy to start the conversation in the board and say, what's the probability of this happening? But I think the conversation should go around more, can we afford if this happens? And if the answer is no, then the board should take the decision. And I think we made that practice and worked well, and it's even cheaper because you react immediately to the threats. So that would be, so through the years, we moved to the cloud in 3 months. We had many other products, like for example, taking cash on the supermarkets, the doomsday card. We changed the operating model to fully distributed. We even changed the way how branches operate. So we changed the network topology, etc., etc. And even simple things, like for example, changing the pins in Google Maps of our data centers. I tell you a funny story, not so funny, but when the war started, my team changed the pins of our data centers, and one of those pins, a year and a half later, ended up being bombed. Which means even simple things, having a team of people, having a network of information. We had groups between banks and the government, so this sharing ideas, not only inside the company, but market level. And all of those combined, I think, helped us to sustain a very fast changing, quite challenging environment. But I don't remember that in the board, and we moved away from the discussion. What's the probability? We went towards a discussion. Can we afford if this happened? And then we reacted on every topic when the answer is no. Yeah, sorry, it was a bit longer, but just wanted to give you the gist of it. So the gist of the last 3 years.
No, this was actually great. Was listening very carefully as well. And I know when we had a conversation before it, you also told me, and right now you re-emphasized the role of engineering, really flexing those engineering muscles, moving to the cloud and making sure that it's not just paper exercise and governance. And also this probability, really, when we talk about, cyber risk quantification, et cetera, and there's always likelihood and impact. But yes, to your point, forget the likelihood in the sense that assume it'll happen, and is this something you can live with or not in your industry, and actually specifically where you are within that sector as well. So thank you. These were really good insights.
To add one topic, maybe to add one sentence to the last bit. We have a principle in which I've been applying with my team the last years. We don't want to play Russian roulette. Russian roulette is any kind of event, even rare, that if it happens can damage your business. So I do not believe much in the probability calculations of risks. Exactly as you said, so we need to buy an insurance for the worst case scenario, even though the probability is quite low. Because many of us didn't believe a war would come, or many other events which happened, and those materialized.
Thank you. No, agree. And obviously, being in industry, that's a unique perspective. Laura, you did mention obviously that in the retail and consumer industry, that's a different space, and within that, the sectors make a difference. But if you think of resilience in that industry, or anything else, of course, that you'd like to mention, how does it manifest itself? Anything you'd like to add to it?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, resilience is the topic du jour at the moment in terms of the buzzword for me with a lot of the clients that I'm working with. And not just a buzzword, a really important topic. I think what I'm experiencing in my industry is this. I really liked what you said, Claude, around not necessarily relying fully on probability. I do think it's in the retail and consumer industry with margins and profit quite tight. You do still have to make some calls and decisions, but operational resilience is a huge thing with my clients. If we can't get goods and services out to consumers, we're not making money. And a day's loss it can be quite bad for our profit margins. So if I think about it that way, resilience is a huge topic in retail and consumer, and people are looking at, how do you on a shoestring budget look at being able to stay up? It used to be the focus used to be all around customer data, and it still is. It's still very important, with GDPR and whatnot. But now there's this shift in, oh my gosh, if my warehouses go down, if my distribution centers go down because of some sort of incident, or if a third party impacts my supply chain, what do I do? Those are some of the big questions that a lot of my colleagues and clients are trying to answer in the retail and consumer industry. So if I had to think around what they're doing around resilience, one is trying to understand recovery time periods and the reality of a recovery time period. Everybody has these RTOs, for example, recovery time objectives, but very few of them look at the sequencing of events. Very few of these kind of classic disaster recovery techniques focus on things like looking at your tier 0 systems, your Active Directories, your ISMS systems that pretty much run your technology estate. How do you recover from that? Also in this industry, I think that there's a lot of, it's quite a dynamic tech environment. Not everybody's, I don't have one client that's 100% cloud-based. So there's still going to be some on-premise discussions. There's also the concept of, operational technology and IoT and recovering that and what that looks like. So that kind of dispersed environment where you're finding different ways where you might recover, it is quite important. And then it's also an industry with a lot of people, right? You've got a back office, finance, IT, procurement, all of that. But you've also got a lot of frontline workers, a lot of people in stores and whatnot. And so you've got a lot of people to educate around making better choices that can make you more resilient. So, enforcing some stronger security measures, for example. And then last but not least, I think the supply chain is a huge, huge topic on resilience. So if I can just offer some things I think a few people are doing well that doesn't cost a lot of money, which is rare, looking at your supply chain and your third parties and really having those interactions with your third parties to understand, especially where you might have a single supplier that's a single point of failure, what's going to happen if you can't provide your service to me or you can't provide these goods to me. Maybe consumer manufacturing, FMCG type of clients might have a supplier that supplies one good or service that nobody else can make. What are you going to do in that situation? And having those open and robust conversations. You saw it this summer with, actually just a couple weeks ago with the Blue Yonder incident. Earlier, a few weeks prior to that, there was a micro-relies incident where these suppliers that helped logistics navigate for retail and consumers, they were taken offline. And so you saw some grocery stores, for example, that, had to completely manually reroute things and resupply their stock offline and implement BCP. So I think that supply chain challenge is one that in my industry people are looking at a lot and trying to find methods and ways to really work in an ecosystem, because we're all reliant on each other these days. Everybody's outsourcing or getting different, supply chains becoming more complex. So what do you do to work together to become more resilient?
Thank you, Laura. I think you offered a bit of a blueprint for establishing a resilience program, but you mentioned so many things. Essentially, look at the value chain, look at how you build resilience into your supplier operation, third parties, customers, warehouse distributions, IT, IoT, OT. It does sound pretty daunting, to be honest. And I'm thinking that if only 2% of the clients or respondents, if you will, feel like they attempted to build this at the enterprise level, then how do they sort of get started? So not to put you on the spot, Marek, I think I'm actually doing this, but if you can follow up what Laura mentioned and maybe offer some pragmatic steps, if you think of building up this resilience, how do you get started? Obviously, you can't boil the ocean, but there's a lot to cover, and I think that blueprint was clear now. How would you get started? What are some of these pragmatic steps? Anything you could offer, Marek?
Yes. So I think both Laura and Nicolette have gave a couple of really interesting points in this regard. So looking from this perspective, let me start where I see the beginning of such a discussion. First, we need to admit and some kind of understand that we live in a super complex environment. And not only the threat landscape is very complex, as we said before, but also our technology landscape is equally complex and getting even more with the all add-ons related to the digital transformation, to the cloud, to AI, Gen AI, and a lot of innovation which the companies are bringing. So I think this has to be taken into account. And looking from this perspective, I think very important first step is to actually define for yourself, for your company, what resilience means to you and how resilience translates to the characteristic of your company, to your industry, to your environment. I think this is quite fundamental because we live in a very interconnected world, and looking from this perspective, we need to understand that resilience is cybersecurity, but also much more. It's also the technology risk management, business continuity management as well, in a much more, I would say, proactive and forward-looking way. But it's very interdependent with how we developed our technology, from the infrastructure layer, enterprise architecture, then solution architecture of each and every piece which we have in our architecture landscapes. So looking from this perspective, we need to understand and we need to build the resiliency not only in this kind of mini silos, but also in a lot of combination and a lot of interrelation between them. This is maybe point number one. I think only understanding this gives a pathway to join this 2% of the companies who are addressing the digital resilience in a kind of holistic way, because I think it's fundamental to understand our gaps, vulnerabilities, potential areas where we shall invest, looking from hardening of our environment across the entire board, across the entire organization. So not only optimizing standalone cybersecurity investments, technology investments, eventually compliance with the regulatory environment, but actually knowing our landscape, knowing our architecture, and knowing all the vulnerabilities which we have, prioritize among them in order to determine which are the most important investments, which are exactly as Nicolette have said, this Russian roulette, let's say, types of investment. What are the biggest risks which we want to mitigate? Knowing, and this refers to what Laura have brought, that we always will have to a certain extent limited budgets. We will not able to solve it all. We need to prioritize. Second very important point to me is that there is a lot of topics related to the resilience which comes from this complexity and, so to say, quote to quote, fall between the chairs. So the topics which are at the kind of, connection point between cybersecurity and engineering. Do we have certain capability, but also how this capability is embedded into our engineering processes? If we have certain elements of the cybersecurity architecture, how is it integrated to our enterprise architecture and to our critical architecture elements, and so on? And this requires a lot of cooperation. So to me, the two fundamental steps or two fundamental elements to start with the resiliency in a kind of, really comprehensive manner was first, or is first, to define properly what it means to us and to our organization, understand our threat landscape and look on our resilience from the threat landscape, which is surrounding us. And second, do it in a very much integrated manner, taking into account cyber, taking into account technology and engineering, and much more proactive in terms of the risk management. This would be, to me, very still high level, but two pieces of advice how to start. So back to you, Peter.
Thank you. I like how you laid this out and summarized it at the very end. Really appreciate this. You mentioned, obviously, and you could see the similarities between what you mentioned and Laura as well. You got to define what this means for your company, not just the industry, not just the sector, but specifically where and when you are and what your business strategy is. And then the threat landscape, and then make sure this is an integrated program. Now, you also mentioned that in today's reality is that the technology ecosystem is very complex. We have new and emerging technologies. You also mentioned AI, and I'd like to actually move on to that. But before I do, I wanted to just remind the audience that you can post questions, and hopefully, if you have time at the end, we'll look to answer them. So businesses can, and they actually do harness the power of new and emerging technologies. We just heard that from Mark as well. And one of these is Gen AI. And again, it's used to bolster actually also the cyber capabilities, but also to bring in creative, innovative ways to engage customers and have some efficiencies. Now, as companies contend with cybersecurity issues and concerns, almost 80% actually of leaders surveyed have ramped up their investments in Gen AI over the last 12 months, with 72% increasing their risk management investment in AI governance, because it was a challenge. So new and emerging technologies are expanding the attack surface. We mentioned this, close to 2/3. So that's like roughly almost 60% of security leaders noted that Gen AI has expanded the cyber attack surface over the last 6 to 12 months, 6 to 9 months maybe. And other technologies are also high, such as cloud technology that was coming in at 72%, even higher. Connected products, I mentioned this at the beginning. Now, I'd like to take a slightly different twist. If you remember when we looked at the survey results, I mentioned secure AI and then use AI for security. So if you take the first bit, securing AI, Ankelite, from your perspective, so the rapid advancement of Gen AI and AI is we know it's ushering in new opportunities across the industries. Now, if you think of your industry, financial services, strictly from a business perspective, could you highlight some ways of how this technology, AI, Gen AI, is used either to find creative ways to engage customers or perhaps to increase internal efficiency? Just something you might be able to share. So again, not the security side, but just how AI and Gen AI are being used from a business standpoint.
Yeah, Peter, thank you so much. But me being me, I would probably make a small detour and just get back to what Marek said last. I'm sorry for that. Because nowadays you cannot have a conversation without talking about Gen AI, so I'll come back to it. But Marek made a very strong point, which I believe is the core of the issues with corporates have. The silos thinking and the silos investments are, in my view, the biggest risk of any corporate nowadays. So budgeting by saying, I'll spend this much money here, like what worked well for us is, for example, bringing closer compliance and security. We understood that the data set which they use is 80 to 90% the same. Like when you are looking for a fraud, for financial fraud, or when you are detecting suspicious activity, we were dealing with the same data sets, two different teams, completely in silos. By merging them, by creating a compliance and security platform, we were able to accelerate a lot. So maybe the second point to what Marek said, efficiency and simplicity is probably the biggest booster of your resilience. If you are, I would say, if I don't know, I'm 20 kilograms too big that I cannot run a marathon. So basically, resilience is very much like a marathon, and being lean helps a lot. Now, coming back to Gen AI, we were experimenting in Ukraine, not in Luminor so much, but in Ukraine, it helped us, for example, with reviewing of all of our user and access rights. It helped us review all of our firewall rules. It helped us review the documents which we had published in Confluence. For example, we launched a chatbot for our service desk to answer questions. So these are topics which are on the sides of your business model. So these are not core topics, but it helped us on efficiency side. And of course, we had a discussion of the governance, but that was more driven by the group. But efficiency-wise, reviewing access rights of 6,000 users every week, you cannot do it manually. Even approving some of those requests or seeing suspicious activities. Yes, we were testing as well with Cloudflare, artificial intelligence, so the WAF, and so it started to sneak in many topics. But the biggest areas which I saw a benefit and upside for the company was in efficiency at this moment. Let's see what comes, what's ahead of us. And my last point, often old school machine learning model outperform a Gen AI model, especially when it came to payments and to dependable products. So I think we should not put our eyes off the machine learning regression models and what we have been using for tens of years.
Absolutely makes sense. Thank you for that. Thank you for circling back around the last point of Marek. I appreciate that. But if we stay with AI, Gen AI as well, data analytics and things that we've been using and automation, thank you for those examples. And again, I think companies in different industries are looking at different use cases. Laura, again, if we look at retail and consumer from a business standpoint, what are some of the use cases that you've seen that are being either tested or adopted in AI? Again, not cyber necessarily, but just more broadly for the business, because ultimately this will mean that those will need to be secured as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest kind of areas, if I talk about the business, so I've done quite a few Gen AI workshops with all kinds of different retail clients and consumer goods clients. And in this particular industry, the budget first tends to go to marketing and improving marketing. Obviously, they've got a lot of data, they've got a lot of customer data, they've got a lot of insights that can really drive value for an organization. So you end up, at least in the experience I've had, there's, again, every company is kind of different, but they're looking to, use Gen AI to improve the data analysis and drive better customer insights. That's probably the biggest. The next one is, I wouldn't really call this AI or a new trend, but you're always trying to drive automation in some of your repeatable processes in procurement and finance. If I think then about the role of security and all of that, and you quite aptly, Peter, divided security use cases and what security's role in governing AI is. I think in governing any kind of use case or any kind of adoption of AI in an organization, security has a massive role to play. And we talk to a lot of clients about what does a responsible AI framework look like. So how do you make sure that your organization has an appropriate strategy, that it's got a code of ethics and guiding principles for AI, that you've got a plan and an operating model for governing this, that you've got definitions of AI. What do we mean by AI? You know, is it generative AI? What is it? Just are you bucketing everything under AI and calling it AI? How much flexibility and autonomy do you want to give each part of your organization and its adoption? And what's that cost, you know, FinOps cost going to be? How are you optimizing that? And then how are you going to train people on being responsible with it? Some of this can really highlight some bad practices, like access controls, really poor access controls. If you just open up all of your data lakes to everybody and tell them, you know, here's ChatGPT, go and do what you want. So I do think that CISOs have to, and security organizations have to think about that overall AI framework. But I do see that most of the use cases, at least in the industries and the clients that I'm working with, kind of start at first prioritizing where they can get closer to customers and where they can get better insights. I think if I think about security use cases, this is a boring one, and I know it's not sexy in any way, shape, or form, but I think it was mentioned earlier, just helping people to find that paper that doesn't always serve as a good defense, but help people find information faster. So using chatbots for developers so that they can say, all right, I want to update this code on this website. What security standards do I need to apply? Versus being given 15 different links of every single standard and operating procedure that they have to follow. They can get more insights that way. And also, I think onboarding onto new technologies has been a really successful use case. So how do we help people to transition to new technology? Because that's just never stopping, is it?
Thank you, Laura. And you covered a lot of ground here. It's very clear that use cases are in abundance. You mentioned terms like responsible AI and trust over AI. So at the end, governance will be important because there's an influx of this really happening. Marek, you brought this topic in, as you mentioned, resilience and being aware of the technology ecosystem that we are on and the changes. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so let me both reply to Encalate and also follow up with what Laura have shared. So looking from AI perspective, actually it does not differ than the other technology. It's very much integrated and building the AI, using AI in the organization to serve the particular business use cases. We need to have in mind also that we need to do it in this responsible and resilient way. And resilient way means, on one hand, of course, it has to be secured. So we need to harden, we need to assure that we have the secure environment for our models. But I think we also need to understand, and this is maybe also something which is somehow maybe boring, but has to be or should be outspoken, that also the basic prerequisites should be met. I mean that the data quality, the AI models in a let's say normal sense, they work as good as the data which is being put into them as feeds. And looking from this perspective, I think a lot of companies has a fundamental gaps in terms of the data governance, data management, data security. And looking from this perspective, to me, this is the absolute, basic factor which has to be improved, which has to be well invested. I discuss with my clients, I usually ask if they are investing, according to what they built on the front end, also to the backend capabilities. So to ensure that they work in the safe environment, but also looking from the data perspective, they are being also well prepared. But this comes back to what we discussed, what we covered with Encalate. This requires a very strong collaboration between the cyber business and technology, and this really requires all these capabilities to put together and have the holistic view. And I think AI and generally technology resilience actually comes to the same points. And here, let me give a shout out to Chris Słotwiński. I know that Chris had some technical issues to join us for this call, but what I wanted to say that he and BNP Bank in Poland are perfect examples or how to put all these capabilities, also how to put the management very closely together and address resilience in terms of the technology really holistically. I mean, looking from this perspective, cybersecurity working very closely with technology and working very closely with business. And I think this is this recipe to have a responsible AI. So building for the business, but in a secured environment, in the well-managed technology environment. And if I put it this way, does it differ from any other technology? We build the technology for business, we build the technology for our clients, but we should do it in a secure way, and we should do it in a well-modernized environment in order to actually reduce the risks and get rid of the vulnerabilities which we have. So I think it's good to look on it this way. But as said, looking for experience of Chris, looking of experience of BNP in Poland, I think there are already the companies who are going into such direction. And this is, as Encalate have said, there are also many others. And I think that they are the good examples to follow and the benchmarks for the building of the resilience in the future. This would be, my side to chip in. Thanks, Peter.
Good. Thank you, Marek. Now, I'm conscious of time. I think this was a really good discussion. We had one topic left, and that's the regulatory compliance, which in and of itself could take up an hour. Last year, in our webcast, we discussed the potential for regulations such as NIS2, DORA, Cyber Resilience Act, and more to drive an increased level of transparency for the incidents and cyber practices, and really requiring broader attention. Now, and this is to you, Encalate, you are in the financial services industry, so DORA may be a good one as well. We're working with several clients. We know there are stringent requirements. To some extent, however, as Marek mentioned, we always have to come back to the basic, right? That blueprint is not always drastically different, but how significant is this uptick in the regulatory environment to you, Encalate, in the big scheme of what's driving your program of work?
Yeah, let me say, the product of banks is trust. And so what we sell, we don't sell really loans or payments, we sell trust. So even the word credit in Latin is the same as the word trust, which means all the regulations which are there are in a way to enhance the trust of the customers and the consumers to what the financial institution does. There are many regulations coming our way, DORA being one of them, but there's BCBS, there's Basel IV, there's the GDPR, which was earlier on. And if you see the spirit of the regulations, because it's very easy to get lost in the details of it, but if you look at the spirit of the regulations, what they want from us, and they hit the same points over and over again. They want from us to take care about our data. They want from us to take care about our customers, that we are not abusing the trust. They want for us to document and know how our processes work. They want from us that the processes are measured, optimized. So they want us to be a well-managed shop. And my core belief is, and it's always been, then if you do a good job, let's talk about data, we talked about AI. Some of the best banks in the world are able to tokenize customer data on production, not only on test systems. So a good architecture solution makes your PCI DSS, your GDPR, your DORA compliance much cheaper. A bad architecture solution makes all of those 10 times more expensive. For example, we were discussing in the bank, like IDs, identifying your customers in your global ecosystem of applications uniquely. If you do that, all your regulations will be cheaper to implement. If you don't do that, you need to make a lot of, we call it auto magic in the end to aggregate data. Data quality is an issue, that's an issue. So to answer your question, I don't think the regulation itself is a challenge. I think the maturity of us as organizations is the challenge in how we manage all of that. And as I see this ecosystem becoming more demanding, it doesn't leave much space for banks not to be well-managed shops. And I'm meaning here, and if you allow me a last statement, A friend of mine mentioned a couple of weeks ago, he said, in the 80s, the branch was the core of the bank. And you would not imagine sitting in a branch, I don't know, a person which was not well trained, not well accustomed. Now IT became the core of the bank, or technology, or digital resilience, because I'm impacting customer, the branches are disappearing. So in that sense, we need to get to understand that technology is not anymore a function of the bank, is the bank, integrated with all other functions. So that would be my answer to that question. So it's not something to stay away from, but it's basically pushing us to have to be a well-managed and optimized digital shop.
Thank you. We got to embrace it. Really appreciate this, Ankelite. And I know we reached the bottom of the hour. So thank you for the last insight. I really hope that the audience appreciated the conversation as much as I did. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Laura, Ankelite, Marek, also Chris, who had technical troubles and wasn't able to voice his insights, for taking the time out of your busy schedule just to be here with us today, sharing your insights and the importance of having a continuous dialogue in the boardroom, having an integrated approach, and really at the end we are building a secure digital society together. And so I think this is very important. I look forward to catching up with all of you in the new year, and wishing everyone a fantastic holiday season. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.